A simple woman mocked at a will reading. Then they discover she alone inherited the entire fortune. They laughed when Emily Bennett entered the elegant hall in her modest floral dress. But their smug smiles disappeared when the attorney revealed Walter Harrington's shocking decision. Everything, the mansion, the millions, all hers. Emily Bennett smoothed the wrinkles of her pale green floral dress as she approached the imposing marble steps of the Harrington estate. The dress was her best, purchased 3 years ago for her cousin's wedding, but standing beneath the crystal chandeliers of the grand entrance hall, she felt painfully out of place. "Name?" asked the stern-faced butler, barely glancing up from his clipboard. "Emily Bennett. I'm here for Mr. Harrington's will reading." Her voice was steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. The butler's eyebrow arched slightly. Yes, the home helper. His personal assistant," Emily corrected gently, though she knew many in Walter's circle viewed her as little more than hired help. "Indeed, this way." As Emily followed him down the polished hallway, memories of Walter Harrington flooded back. His kind eyes, his patient explanations, his quiet wisdom. For 5 years, she had organized his schedule, managed his correspondence, and in his final months, held his hand as cancer slowly claimed him. The meeting room was already filled with Walter's relatives, the nieces and nephews who had rarely visited while he was alive. They were impeccably dressed in designer mourning attire, their whispered conversations halting abruptly as Emily entered. "Well, well," came a voice from near the window. "Look who decided to show up." Richard Harrington, Walter's nephew, approached with a glass of scotch already in hand, despite the early hour. His blue suit was perfectly tailored, his yellow tie a splash of color against the somber gathering. "Hello, Richard," Emily replied politely. "It's good to see you." "Is it?" He chuckled, loud enough for others to hear. "Seems a bit above your pay grade to be here, doesn't it?" His eyes swept dismissively over her dress. "This is family business, after all." "Uncle specifically requested her presence," interjected Bradley Sheffield, the family attorney, who had just entered the room. "She has every right to be here," Richard shrugged, turning to wink at his cousin Victoria. Of course. Probably needs someone to serve coffee, right?" Several relatives snickered as Emily found a seat in the corner of the room. She noticed Martha, the estate's longtime housekeeper, giving her a sympathetic smile from across the room. "Now that everyone has arrived," Bradley announced, placing his briefcase on the mahogany table, "we can begin the reading of Walter Harrington's last will and testament." Emily folded her hands in her lap, steeling herself. She wasn't here for money. Walter had already given her something far more valuable than his fortune, his trust and friendship. She was here because he'd asked her to come, and she had never let him down in life. She wouldn't start now. 5 years earlier, Emily had answered a simple newspaper ad. Personal assistant needed for elderly businessman. Organization skills essential. She had been desperate then, newly laid off from her accounting job at a firm that had suddenly downsized. The moment she'd stepped into Walter Harrington's study for the interview, surrounded by leather-bound books and the gentle ticking of an antique grandfather clock, something had clicked between them. "Tell me, Miss Bennett," Walter had asked, peering over his reading glasses, "why should I hire you over the 20 other applicants?" Emily had smiled. "Because I'm organized enough to manage your business affairs, but stubborn enough to tell you when you're wrong." Instead of being offended, Walter had laughed, a deep, genuine laugh that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Honesty, I like that." He hired her on the spot. In the years that followed, their professional relationship had evolved into something deeper, a friendship built on mutual respect. Walter taught Emily about investments and fine art. She introduced him to smartphone technology and streaming services. They shared lunch nearly every day, discussing everything from philosophy to baseball. "You remind me of my late wife," Walter had told her once. "Caroline never let me get away with anything either." The memory of one particular afternoon stood out in Emily's mind. She had entered his study to find Richard and Victoria there, pressuring Walter about changing his will. "Uncle, be reasonable," Richard had insisted. "The foundation is just going to waste your money. The family should have a say." Walter's face had been a mask of quiet dignity. "My money, my say. Please close the door on your way out." After they'd left, Walter had sighed heavily. "The vultures are circling, Emily." "They're just concerned about you," she'd offered, though she didn't quite believe it herself. Walter had fixed her with a knowing look. "No, they're concerned about my money. There's a difference." He'd picked up a framed photo of his late wife. "Caroline and I never had children of our own. Sometimes I wonder if that was a mistake." "It's never too late to make a difference," Emily had said. Walter had studied her thoughtfully. "No, I suppose it isn't." In his final weeks, as cancer confined him to his bed, Emily had spent hours reading to him, adjusting his pillows, and simply sitting beside him. The relatives rarely visited, sending expensive flower arrangements instead of their presence. On his last day, Walter had grasped her hand weakly. "Remember what I taught you," he'd whispered, "about value, true value." Emily had nodded, tears in her eyes. "I will. I promise." Hours later, he was gone. Bradley Sheffield cleared his throat, commanding attention from everyone in the elegant meeting room. "Before I begin," he said, adjusting his glasses, "I'd like to remind everyone that Walter was of completely sound mind when he finalized this will 3 months ago." Emily glanced around the room at the assembled relatives. Beside Richard stood his wife Penelope, drumming her manicured nails on her designer purse. Victoria Pemberton, Walter's niece, was whispering something to her brother Sebastian. Their father, Charles Pemberton, Walter's brother-in-law, was checking his gold watch impatiently. They were all here, the relatives who had been conspicuously absent during Walter's illness, but who now sat expectantly mentally calculating their portions of the Harrington fortune. "Some of us have actual jobs to get back to," Charles remarked loudly. "Perhaps we could speed this along?" "Of course," Bradley replied with the practiced patience of a man accustomed to dealing with difficult clients. "I'll begin with the specifics." As the attorney sorted through his papers, Richard sidled up to Emily again. "I bet he left you a nice little something," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "A month's salary, perhaps? Maybe that hideous vase you always dusted in his study?" "Richard," Penelope hissed, "don't talk to the help." Emily remained silent, refusing to take the bait. "What?" Richard smirked. "I'm just saying Uncle Walter was always charitable, especially toward pretty young things who paid him attention." Several relatives chuckled, except Martha the housekeeper, who shot Emily a sympathetic glance. Victoria joined in, her voice carrying across the room. "I just hope she hasn't convinced him to leave a fortune to that ridiculous children's charity she's always going on about." She turned to Emily with false sweetness. "No offense, dear, but this is family money. It should stay in the family." "Wouldn't have pegged you as the gold digger type," Sebastian added, looking Emily up and down. "But I guess the quiet ones are always full of surprises." Emily felt her cheeks burning, but kept her composure. In the 5 years she'd worked for Walter, she'd grown accustomed to the family's thinly veiled disdain. None of them had ever understood the genuine friendship she and Walter had shared. Charles Pemberton stomped his foot impatiently. "For heaven's sake, Bradley, get on with it." Yes, of course," Bradley nodded, finally organizing his papers. "Walter's estate is substantial, approximately $47 million in assets, including this property, his investment portfolio, art collection, and various holdings." The room seemed to collectively hold its breath. "Now," Bradley continued, "as for the distribution—" "We know how this goes," Richard interrupted. "Just skip to the amounts, Bradley." "Who gets what?" Bradley Sheffield looked up from his papers, his expression unreadable. "Very well. Let's proceed. I, Walter Edward Harrington, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament," Bradley read formally. "I revoke all previous wills and codicils." Standard legal language followed, declarations and formal statements that caused several relatives to shift impatiently in their seats. "Get to the good stuff already," Sebastian muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Bradley ignored him and continued reading. "First, to my loyal household staff, who have served me faithfully over the years." Martha the housekeeper straightened in her chair. "I leave the sum of $100,000 each, to be distributed tax-free." Martha gasped softly, her eyes welling with tears. The other staff members present, the gardener, the cook, and the chauffeur, exchanged shocked glances. "That's quite generous," Richard remarked, though his tone suggested he thought it excessive. "To my brother-in-law, Charles Pemberton," Bradley continued. Charles leaned forward, a smile already forming. I leave my collection of vintage watches, which he has long admired. The smile froze on Charles's face. The watches? Just the watches? Bradley nodded. Yes, just the watches. But they can't be worth more than a few $100,000, Charles protested. To my niece, Victoria, Bradley read, ignoring the interruption. Victoria smoothed her skirt, composing herself with the assurance of someone who expected good news. I leave my mother's jewelry collection and the sum of $50,000. Victoria's jaw dropped. 50,000? That's it? To Sebastian, my grandnephew. Here we go, Sebastian winked at his sister. I leave my first edition book collection and $50,000. Sebastian's smile vanished. Books? Is this some kind of joke? Richard stepped forward, his confidence unwavering. And to me, his favorite nephew? Bradley adjusted his glasses. To my nephew Richard, I leave my golf clubs and memorabilia, along with $50,000. The room erupted in protests. This can't be right. There must be another will. 50,000 is nothing compared to what he has. Bradley raised his voice above the commotion. If I may continue. What about the rest? Richard demanded, his face flushing red. The houses, the investments, the company shares. Who gets those? I'm coming to that, Bradley replied calmly. Please allow me to finish. The room settled into a tense silence, all eyes now fixed on the attorney as he turned to the final page of the will. As to the remainder of my estate, Bradley read, including all real property, financial assets, business interests, and personal possessions not specifically mentioned above. He paused, glancing up from the document. Emily sat quietly in her corner, expecting nothing, preparing to say her final goodbye to Walter once the reading concluded. I hereby bequeath the entirety to... And Emily Bennett, my loyal assistant, trusted confidant, and the daughter I wish I had. The room fell into stunned silence. Emily froze, certain she had misheard. This can't be right! Richard was the first to break the silence, his voice sharp with outrage. Read it again. Bradley Sheffield adjusted his glasses and repeated calmly, I hereby bequeath the entirety to Emily Bennett. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. This had to be a mistake. Walter had never mentioned anything about leaving her his fortune. Absolutely not, Victoria shrieked, jumping to her feet. She manipulated him. She took advantage of a sick old man. $45 million to the secretary? Charles sputtered, his face turning purple. This is preposterous. All eyes turned to Emily, some filled with shock, others with unbridled hatred. She sat frozen, unable to process what was happening. There's an accompanying letter, Bradley announced, retrieving another envelope from his briefcase. Walter asked that I read it aloud if his decision was questioned. You bet it's questioned, Richard snapped, loosening his yellow tie as if it were suddenly too tight. This is elder abuse, plain and simple. Bradley opened the envelope and began to read Walter's handwritten letter. To my family, if you are hearing this letter, it means you are contesting my decision to leave my estate to Emily. I expected nothing less. For years, I have watched as you visited only when you needed money or favors. I have listened as you spoke of your rightful inheritance behind my back. Not once in my final months did most of you visit me, except Emily, who read to me daily, who arranged my medications, who held my hand when the pain was unbearable. Emily never asked for money. When I offered her bonuses, she often declined, saying she was already paid fairly. She has demonstrated the values that I had hoped to see in my own family: integrity, compassion, and genuine care for others. I have not made this decision lightly, nor out of spite. I have made it because Emily has proven herself to be the person best suited to steward my legacy and continue my philanthropic work. Emily's eyes filled with tears as Walter's words washed over her. Around the room, the relatives sat in various states of shock and anger. I had my attorney investigate each of you, the letter continued. I know about the gambling debts, Richard. I know about the tax fraud, Charles. I know about the embezzlement from your husband's company, Victoria. Emily, however, has lived a life of quiet integrity. She will do what's right with my fortune. To my family, I'm sorry you couldn't be the people I hoped you would be. Bradley folded the letter. The will has been properly executed and witnessed. It is legally binding. This is outrageous! Richard exploded, slamming his fist on the mahogany table. I'll fight this in court. We all will. The elegant meeting room had transformed into a battleground. Victoria was sobbing dramatically into a silk handkerchief, while Sebastian paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair in frustration. You planned this all along, didn't you? Penelope hissed, pointing an accusatory finger at Emily. Wormed your way into his life, played the devoted assistant, all while plotting to steal our inheritance. Emily remained seated, still processing the staggering news. I had no idea, she said quietly. I never asked for this. Oh, save the innocent act, Charles barked. No one's buying it. A nobody from nowhere suddenly inherits millions. There's only one way that happens. Martha the housekeeper stepped forward, her voice firm despite her age. That's enough. I've worked for Mr. Harrington for 30 years, and I've seen how all of you treated him. Like an ATM machine with an inconveniently long lifespan. Stay out of this, old woman, Richard snapped. Bradley Sheffield cleared his throat. I should inform everyone that Walter anticipated this reaction. He recorded a video statement 3 months ago, specifically addressing any accusations of undue influence or manipulation. Of course he did, Sebastian muttered. Furthermore, Bradley continued, he was examined by 2 independent medical experts who certified his mental competence. This will is ironclad. Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of red. We'll see about that, he said through gritted teeth. I've got connections with every judge in this county. Which Walter was well aware of, Bradley replied smoothly. That's why he filed the will in 3 different jurisdictions and arranged for any contest to be heard by a judicial panel in New York, where none of you have connections. Emily finally found her voice. I never wanted his money. Her words were soft, but carried throughout the now silent room. I only wanted to help him through his final days with dignity. How noble, Victoria sneered. And yet, you're not refusing the millions, are you? Emily met her gaze steadily. Walter trusted me to carry on his work. I won't betray that trust. So that's it? Richard threw his hands up. Some random woman walks away with the Harrington fortune while the actual Harringtons get trinkets and pocket change. She's not random, Martha interjected. She was there for him. Where were all of you when he needed someone to drive him to chemotherapy? When he couldn't sleep because of the pain? An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. This meeting is concluded, Bradley announced firmly. My office will be in touch regarding the transfer of assets and specific bequests. Ms. Bennett, if you'll stay behind, we have some paperwork to discuss. As the stunned relatives began to file out, shooting venomous glares at Emily, she remained seated, overwhelmed by the weight of Walter's final gift and the responsibility that came with it. After the relatives had stormed out, only Emily, Bradley, and Martha remained in the meeting room. The tension lingered in the air like a heavy perfume. Tea, dear, Martha offered, her weathered hand patting Emily's shoulder gently. Emily nodded gratefully. Thank you, Martha. When they were alone, Bradley sat down across from Emily. Walter wanted me to give you this privately, he said, sliding a sealed envelope across the table. He was quite specific that no one else should be present when you read it. With trembling fingers, Emily broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The familiar handwriting brought fresh tears to her eyes. My dear Emily, it began. By now, Bradley will have delivered the news that has undoubtedly shocked everyone, none more than you. I can picture your face as you read this, wondering why I would burden you with such an enormous responsibility. The simple truth is that you are the only person I trust. When Caroline died 15 years ago, a part of me died too. I retreated into my work, my money, and my solitude. My family circled like vultures, interested only in what they could get from me. Then you answered that newspaper ad, and little by little, you brought me back to life. Your kindness wasn't an act. Your intelligence wasn't wasted on petty schemes. You showed me that goodness still exists in this world. Remember our conversations about my foundation? About helping children from disadvantaged backgrounds get the education they deserve? You're the only one who ever truly understood why that mattered to me. I came from nothing, Emily. My parents were factory workers. I got lucky with one good investment that led to another. But luck shouldn't determine a child's future. Merit should. Hard work should. Kindness should. You embody those qualities, which is why I know you'll use my fortune wisely. Not just for yourself, though please do buy yourself a nice home and take that trip to Paris you've always dreamed about. But more importantly, you'll help others as you helped me. I've had Bradley set up everything. The foundation is yours to run. The investments are diversified and stable. There's a team of advisors ready to assist, but the decisions will be yours. Don't let my family intimidate you. They'll threaten and they'll posture, but they have no legal ground to stand on. I've made sure of that. In these past 5 years, you've been the daughter I never had. I'm only sorry I didn't tell you so when I was alive. Consider this my final way of saying thank you, and my way of ensuring that my legacy continues in hands I trust. With deepest affection and absolute confidence, Walter. Emily pressed the letter to her heart, tears flowing freely now. He really thought of everything, didn't he? She whispered. Bradley nodded. Walter was nothing, if not thorough. I don't know the first thing about managing millions, Emily admitted. That's why I'm here, Bradley said kindly. Walter left detailed instructions. We'll take it one step at a time. 3 days after the will reading, Emily returned to the mansion, her mansion now, though she could hardly believe it, to begin sorting through Walter's personal effects. She had spent the intervening time in a daze, sleeping on her friend Olivia's couch, unable to face returning to her small apartment, where everything seemed too normal, too unchanged. As she pulled up to the grand entrance in her aging compact car, she noticed Richard's luxury sedan parked in the circular driveway. Her stomach tightened. She had hoped to avoid another confrontation so soon. Martha greeted her at the door with a worried expression. They're waiting in the study, she whispered. Richard, Victoria, and their lawyer. They've been here for an hour. Emily squared her shoulders. Thank you, Martha. The study had been Walter's sanctuary, walls lined with books, his antique desk positioned to catch the morning light. Now, Richard sat behind that desk, as if it were already his, while Victoria and a stern-looking man in an expensive suit occupied the leather chairs across from him. Finally, Richard said as she entered, the lady of the manor arrives. What do you want, Richard? Emily asked, remaining standing. This is Julian Barnes, Richard gestured to the man, one of the top estate attorneys in the country. Barnes offered Emily a tight smile. Ms. Bennett, my clients have asked me to present you with an offer. An offer? A settlement, Victoria interjected, to avoid the unpleasantness of a lengthy court battle. Barnes slid a document across the desk. $5 million, tax-free. In exchange, you relinquish all claims to the estate. Emily didn't touch the paper. Mr. Sheffield already explained that the will is ironclad. Nothing is ironclad, Barnes replied smoothly. We have grounds to contest based on undue influence. The process could take years, during which the estate would be frozen. No assets available to you, no foundation work, just endless legal battles. And your reputation dragged through the mud, Richard added, leaning forward. Every detail of your relationship with my uncle examined. Every conversation, every late night working, every private moment questioned and scrutinized. Are you threatening me? Emily asked quietly. We're offering you a solution, Victoria said. $5 million is more money than someone like you would ever see in a lifetime. Be reasonable. Emily thought of Walter's letter, of his trust in her, of the foundation work he had been so passionate about. No, she said simply. The three stared at her in disbelief. Excuse me? Richard sputtered. I said no. Walter entrusted me with his legacy for a reason. I won't betray that trust. Richard stood abruptly, his face flushing. You'll regret this. By the time we're done, you'll wish you'd never met my uncle. Emily met his gaze unflinchingly. Walter was worth 10 of you, Richard. That's something money can't buy. As they stormed out, Emily remained in the study, surrounded by Walter's books, feeling his presence more strongly than ever. I won't let you down, she whispered to the empty room. I promise. 1 month after the will reading, Emily sat in the boardroom of the Harrington Foundation, surrounded by financial advisors, charity directors, and Bradley Sheffield. The transition hadn't been easy. Richard and Victoria had made good on their threats, filing multiple lawsuits and even speaking to tabloid newspapers with wild accusations about Emily's relationship with Walter. But Emily had remained steady, drawing strength from Walter's confidence in her. Today was the first official meeting of the foundation under her leadership. As you can see from the projections, she explained, pointing to the presentation on the large screen. By restructuring our grant process, we can increase the number of scholarships by 30% while maintaining our endowment. The board members nodded approvingly. Emily had spent weeks studying Walter's foundation work, learning the intricacies of philanthropic finance, and developing new approaches to maximize their impact. "Ms. Bennett," said Dr. Eleanor Wright, a longtime board member, "I must say, your grasp of these complex issues is impressive. Walter chose well." "Thank you," Emily replied. "I had an excellent teacher." As the meeting concluded, Bradley pulled Emily aside. "There's something you should know," he said quietly. "The judge dismissed the family's main lawsuit today, called it frivolous and without merit." Emily let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "That's good news." "It's better than that," Bradley continued. "The judge ordered them to pay all legal costs. They're running out of money to fight you, Emily. I think this might be the beginning of the end." Later that afternoon, Emily returned to the mansion she had finally moved in the previous week to find an unexpected visitor waiting in the foyer. Martha ushered her into the sitting room, where Victoria Pemberton sat alone, looking considerably less polished than usual. "Victoria," Emily said cautiously, "this is a surprise." Victoria didn't meet her eyes. "I came to talk. No lawyers, no Richard, just us." Emily sat down across from her. "I'm listening." "Why are you doing this?" Victoria asked, her voice lacking its usual edge. "Fighting so hard? You could take the settlement and live comfortably for the rest of your life." "Because this isn't about the money," Emily replied. "It's about honoring Walter's wishes." Victoria looked up, her expression unexpectedly vulnerable. "You really cared about him, didn't you?" "I did, very much." A moment of silence stretched between them. "He was always difficult," Victoria said finally. "Even when we were children, hard to please, demanding excellence. It was easier to stay away." "He was lonely," Emily said gently, "especially after Caroline died." Victoria nodded, a hint of regret crossing her face. "I'm dropping my lawsuit," she said suddenly. "Richard can keep fighting if he wants, but I'm done." "Why?" Victoria stood, straightening her jacket. "Because Uncle Walter was right about one thing. You're a better person than we are." As Victoria left, Emily felt something shift inside her, a growing certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what Walter had trusted her to do. 6 months later, Emily stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Walter and Caroline Harrington Educational Center, providing tutoring and college preparation for underprivileged students. The battle with Richard had finally ended when his own lawyer abandoned the case. Emily had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in impact, in lives changed and opportunities created. Walter had known that all along. If you've enjoyed this story of unexpected fortune and finding purpose, please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales. Share in the comments where you're watching from. After all, life's greatest inheritance is the connections we make with each other.